One to preparing high school. There we go. Just want to welcome everyone to preparing high school students with disabilities for college success. My name is Adam Hartwell. I am the outreach manager for the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. With me as fellow panelists, we have Jenna Shales, Sarah Lazare, and Kaitlin Karetka, who are going to introduce themselves. And we also have Julie Shields Rutina, who's going to be taking care of our chat and making sure that we don't miss any questions. If my fellow panelists would do me the pleasure of introducing yourselves briefly, and then we're just going to get on our way. Anybody wants to start?
Yeah, my mute is off. So my name is Sarah Lazare, the director of the Banacos Academic Center at Westfield State University. We have 2 disability support programs, one learning disability program. It's a mission-based, and disability services, which is for everyone.
And I am Kaitlin Karetka. I am the Access Advisor in Disability Services that Sarah was just mentioning at Westfield State University.
Hi, everyone. I am Jenna Shales. I am the Director of Student Accessibility Services at Bridgewater State University.
Thank you, everyone. So my role is that I'm focused on the Attainable Savings Program, which is the Massachusetts version of ABLE accounts. So I'll be running through that program very briefly. I'm not going to be going into a lot of the details about that. And then I'm going to be passing it off to these wonderful people to talk about more about how the programs could be utilized when you're transitioning from high school into college and the college experience itself. And we will have lots of opportunity to answer questions as we go along and at the end. So I work for the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, which is a state authority that was created in 1982 to help families plan, save, and pay for college and reach financial goals. The Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience, or ABLE Act, amended the federal tax code in 2014 to add Section 529A, very similar to a 529 plan and how we set these up. This legislation established what are called ABLE accounts, and in Massachusetts we call that the Attainable Savings Plan, which are tax-exempt accounts for eligible individuals with disabilities that can be used for what are called qualified disability expenses, while still keeping your eligibility for federal public benefits. Individuals are eligible for an attainable savings account if the onset of a disability occurred before the individual turned 26 years old, regardless of current age. Also in 2026, that will be expanded to before the age of 46. And also that the individual is eligible to receive SSI or SSDI due to their disability, or they self-certify as meeting requirements. That requires a diagnosis with functional limitations, such as those in the Social Security Administration's Blue Book. Some general categories I've included here, but things that I like to mention are long-term recovery from cancer, significant mental health challenges, significant physical health challenges, developmental disability. There's actually quite a bit that applies to this, and so if you believe that you are having your day-to-day life affected by any kind of diagnoses, you might want to look into it. Attainable accounts are allowed to be opened by either the individual themselves, a person with the power of attorney for that individual, their legal guardian, their spouse, their parent, sibling, or their rep payee. This is a hierarchy of who can open attainable accounts. So people who do so need to certify, and this is not like an official certification, but you need to essentially know that nobody who's higher in that list wants to open one instead of you. You should always consider the designated beneficiary is the owner of the ABLE account, regardless of whether or not someone else has signature authority over it. Things that what are called qualified disability expenses that ABLE accounts can apply to include all expenses that are relating to health, housing, education, transportation, assistive technology or assistive technology supports, employment trainings or supports, personal support services, and basic living needs. These should be understood to be expenses they don't have to be in medical necessity. They're just something and they don't need to be benefiting someone besides the individual. And support services can be included, considered to include financial management, administrative services, legal fees, expenses for oversight and monitoring. Also because remember that, education and support services are both in this list. So tutoring and direct supports in the college environment are also involved here. If they are things that would not be following this list, distributions would be subject to taxation. So if withdrawal is made with a non-qualified disability expense, that owner might be subject to both the regular income taxes because the money that was taken out would be considered income, and also a 10% penalty. So make sure that you are really considering whether or not you think it meets the guidelines. When it comes to a student who's opening an attainable account, they can help because they can subsidize the college experience. You can use them for tuition, books, training, tutors, assistive technology, or learning aids, all sorts of things that can help you out. One of the nice things about an attainable account is it remains active regardless of your matriculation status. So if you decide that you want to take part-time college for a little while, come back, go out, your ABLE account isn't affected by that. And it can also continue to assist you after you complete your education. Attainable allows the owner to or beneficiary to save over the $2,000 that's allowable under the Social Security Administration without affecting your SSI benefits. Anyone at all can contribute to an attainable account, including your family and friends. Beneficiaries have immediate access to funds, and they can provide individuals with disabilities financial independence as well as tax benefits. In 2023, the contribution limits have increased. The total annual contribution cannot exceed $17,000 per year. One of the things that I saw a lot of questions about when I've done this in the past is they were like, who can contribute $17,000? $17,000 is the total. So everybody's contributions combined. If employed, the beneficiary can also contribute an additional $13,590 each year due to the Able to Work Act. The maximum account balance cannot exceed $500,000, and SSI will not be affected until the account exceeds $100,000. Now, I want to make a note here again, based on questions I've received. This is an investment account, so it will grow. So it's the account reaches $100,000, and that includes the growth of the account. There is no annual account maintenance fee. If you decide that you're going to be going into a more aggressive investment structure, there are investment fees based on the portfolio, and they tend to range from 0.57% to 0.94% of assets, somewhat. There are 8 possible portfolios a person can choose from. On this list, the most conservative is at the top. It's a money market portfolio and has almost no risk whatsoever. And it goes down to extremely aggressive at 85% aggressive portfolio at the bottom. Greater risk, greater reward, but also greater risk, right? Units on the portfolios are municipal fund securities and are subject to market fluctuation and volatility. So gain or loss can occur. Beneficiaries are allowed to change which of these 8 sections they utilize twice per year. To open an account, the accounts are owned and managed by Fidelity Investments. So you'd go to fidelity.com/able. That's actually a bounce site these days. So it's going to actually then bring you to fidelity.com/attainable/overview. But on that page, you'll be able to review the plan disclosure documents. There's essentially everything that I've said quickly as a half a sentence has got multiple paragraphs if you want to read in detail. And then you can decide how you might want to allocate your funds among those 8 portfolio options, including the money market account. They have a really excellent attainable trained team there that can assist you, and they have fiduciaries who can advise you. The Able Financial Planning Act, provided the beneficiary is the same individual on both accounts, or one is the family member, the other, you can take your 529 college savings plan and transfer it into an ABLE account without incurring any penalties or taxes. Also, there's this thing called the Savers Credit. So ABLE account owners who meet certain criteria can receive a Savers Credit on their federal taxes for their contributions into an ABLE account. Individuals, if they are eligible, if they are age 18 or older, are not full-time students and are not claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax returns. As long as the withdrawals are spent on QDEs, qualified disability expenses, the growth on the account, so again, it's an investment account. So if the account earns money on those investments, that is not considered income to the individual and will not be taxed as such. Attainable funds cannot be taken directly out of the attainable account because of the fact that it is an investment account. So it's sort of essentially when you're taking money out, it's a small scale trade. But what you can do is set up either another bank account and transfer funds to it, or you can set up a Fidelity cash management account at the same time. And because they're in the same company, it makes it very easy to transfer funds out of it if you want to make withdrawals. The nice thing about the cash management account, it comes with a Visa debit card, so you can use it at ATMs and just swipe and whatever. So it makes it very easy to take money out of your attainable account and utilize it as needed. One of the big things that we do like to note, because it can trip people up, is funds withdrawn for housing must be used in the same calendar month that they're withdrawn. So don't take it out on the 30th to pay your rent on the 1st. Because if you do that, unfortunately, due to legislation and what have you, that will be counted as income. So if you take $600 out for your rent and you wait till next month to give it to your landlord, that will be considered $600 income, which can have a major effect on your SSI. Attainable accounts are eligible for direct deposit, including SSI, SSDI benefit funds. So you can direct deposit your paycheck into your attainable account. Unfortunately, you have to do your direct deposit has to stay under that initial 17,000. Even though the additional 13,590 is allowable under able to work, you have to cash that out and then put it in yourself. You can't have that put in by your workplace. The nice thing is it's just like any other bank account, including you can split it up for your paycheck. I'm going to put half into my attainable account, half into my checking account. They've got, a routing number, an account number. They'll do it. It would be just like anything else when you were setting up your paycheck. So you can split up your work income anywhere you want. SSI and SSDI are only allowed to be deposited to one place. So if you want to direct deposit it to your ABLE account, you won't be able to also split it and direct deposit it to your checking account. So you have to decide if it's all or nothing. If you want to split it up, you're going to want to direct deposit it to your personal account and then put some of it into your attainable account. Once a attainable account is opened, there is a systematic investment plan that can be established for $15 a month or $45 per quarter if you don't want to be putting a significant amount of funds in to start. The beneficiary or PSA can assign a designated survivor in the event of their death who will receive the balance of the account after all actions on the account have been completed. They can also do a successor beneficiary, so you can transfer your balance to somebody else's attainable account. When the person passes, the account is restricted for 1 year, 12 months, with the exception of healthcare or like if you were in the hospital and you passed, all your medical expenses and your funereal expenses can be paid out of your attainable account, despite it being restricted for everything else. And it is also subject to what is called Medicare recapture for any state wherein the beneficiary has lived. There are some wonderful resources to get a lot more details about how these accounts work, including MEFA.com/attainable, which is a fantastic company. I recommend them for no reason whatsoever, as well as the National Resource Center, which is wonderful. They do a lot of great work. Fidelity, of course, has their own information. The Social Security Administration has done spotlights on these accounts, and we also have a email sign up that once again we'll make sure that these slides are available after we finish this presentation. So if people want to receive updates as we get them, because these accounts are only improving every year, we'd love to get that information to you. And with that being said, I am going to hand the baton over.
Thanks, Adam.
No,
So
thank
let's
you.
skip this slide because I didn't put Kaitlin on it. I'm so sorry, Kaitlin. Maybe we
You're
should
fine.
do just, all right, we should do quick introductions again. I know we just said it, but a lot of folks have joined. Also to reiterate what Adam just said, the slides from this PowerPoint, as well as a recording of this presentation, will be made available and will be sent out by the MEFA crew tomorrow, I believe is what Julie indicated. So again, my name is Jenna Shales. I am at Bridgewater State University. I oversee student accessibility services, and I am joined by Kaitlin and Sarah to talk more about the college aspect and navigating that as a student with a disability. Kaitlin, Sarah, one more introduction.
Sure. I love speaking with parents and students about what it is like to be in college, because I want to make sure that people are prepared. And we often see students who are not prepared, who have expectations of what happened in high school. They think it's going to carry on into college. So I like to kind of flesh that out and have people be aware. So welcome. I'm excited to talk with you.
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Kaitlin, the Access Advisor at Westfield State. Similar to Sarah, I really enjoyed these conversations and presentations because I think they help kind of set the expectations for students in high school with disabilities and what they can expect, you know, at the college level. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you all today.
Thank you. And as you can see on our kind of bulleted list here of topics we want to review with you, there is a lot to take in, including lots of differences. So I'm going to start on the next slide, Adam, that just as a little introduction about my office at Bridgewater State. This is Student Accessibility Services. Essentially, we work directly with students, faculty, staff, and other aspects of our community to make the student experience as accessible as possible. So that can be through accommodations, that can be through additional programming, all sorts of resources. We are called Student Accessibility Services. There are other names at other schools for similar departments. You will see disability resources, access resources, but there should be an office like this that serves this function, though it may look a little bit different at different schools, but anywhere you plan to go. Next slide.
Well, at some schools, actually, it's a one person. So a lot of small
Yeah.
private schools will just have one person, and it might be a dean of student success. That the person might have a different title, but just put in disability in the website browse search, and you should find the office.
So at Bridgewater, we support over 1,000 students, which is roughly about 10% of our total enrollment. The reason I'm highlighting this is because we know that 23% of students at Bridgewater self-report as having a disability. And if Adam moves to the next slide, you will see that that 23% aligns very closely with what other colleges or universities are identifying. The really staggering part of this that I want to highlight is in elementary and secondary education, about 20% of those students do still have a disability. So that's, you know, pretty continuous, but 94% of those students that have a disability receive some sort of help or accommodation in high school. That's a really big drop when you think about it with the numbers that I just, you know, said before, where you're looking at half, maybe 3/4, right? And there's lots of reasons why that number is smaller, and we'll touch base on some of those today as well. Let's go. So as far as disabilities in the higher education environment goes, this is kind of the diagnostic categories that Bridgewater State University utilizes to determine kind of that first step of eligibility for supports through my office. Sarah, does your school's list look pretty similar?
We don't do a list. We go by the broader definition on the right-hand bottom corner.
Excellent. So that would be a diagnosis basically that substantially limits one or more major life areas. And where we see that a lot being college, right, is the active learning, right? Any more to add about those?
Yeah, I think one thing I think is that's important is that, especially in this age range of 18 to 25, for the most part, a lot of people do not have a diagnosis, like a handful. A bunch of people don't have a diagnosis, but you still might have a disability. So if you have not been diagnosed, I think it's still important to get, you know, closest to what the symptoms are. You're going to go through that a little bit, right?
Yeah, we'll get there,
Yeah.
I think.
Yep. So even if the disability or the condition is not yet labeled, doesn't mean you don't have a disability. So we will still work with you. Come talk to us.
Thanks.
Kaitlin.
All right. Caitlin's all over it. So let's start jumping into some of the differences between high school and college, because there are a lot, as we indicated. Starting out with just the laws, if you move to the next slide, Adam, I would love to begin highlighting for you the kind of core of the work that we do, or the foundation of it, is based on ADA law in the college environment, and 504 law and some other laws as well. But primarily we look at ADA and 504 law. ADA and 504 do still apply in K through 12, but the really big law or grouping of laws that guides the services and the experience that a student has in K through 12 is the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, right? And so that's going to cover infants right on up until they either age out or they graduate high school. And another really big component of that is the free appropriate public education, FAPE, right? That is guaranteed to happen in the least restrictive environment. That is not a thing in the college environment. It's not part of ADA as a whole, right? A really big difference in that means that it is the responsibility of the school district in K through 12 to look for students who might need specialized education, right? It's the responsibility of the school district then to facilitate that evaluation, right? To initiate services, to document services, ideally come up with a nice agreement with family members, other stakeholders about those services, and to put it all in an IEP or 504 plan. And really the other big party kind of leading that experience in K through 12 is the parent, right? Or the primary advocate, the guardian. You know, that's where a lot of the communication and advocacy comes from. The goal of that IDEA setup is to move the student through the process of K through 12 in a successful manner, right? Sarah, you always have a great way of kind of tying that up. Anything to add?
Yeah, the IDEA, they want the students to be successful, and that makes the transition to college very difficult because our goal is different. But students would be successful by making sure that they can understand the concepts, that they can demonstrate understanding of the concepts. Often they do not have to do as much work as everybody else, because it might take them longer to process the information, to decode the information, to sit still and do the information. So they might not be doing as much work. So that sometimes does not prepare them for college. And that is one of the things that I will talk a bit more about.
So, you know, as Sarah indicated, the goals of this are different, right? So IDEA, she said, you know, is geared towards success, whereas ADA is geared towards providing access, right? What a student does with that access is up to them. Of course, we want to see students be successful, right? But they play a really huge role in kind of writing their success story. So ADA, just as a set of laws, applies to all other qualified individuals with a specific disability that, and we said this before, significantly impacts one or more major life areas. And it is a civil rights law. It is to protect people from discrimination. The student or the person who is seeking accommodation, supports, they have to self-identify. So it's not the university's responsibility to find these students. The student has to individually go out and self-identify to the appropriate resource and request those supports, right? And the student has to self-advocate. And we'll get into a little bit more of why the student is running so much of this process in a couple slides. But it's really important and it's great practice for future citizenship, right? But again, it is all about access and the student-driven experience for this. Next slide, please. So this is a visual that I love using to try to bring it home when it comes to the difference between access, success, equality, right? So the first slide to the left, the graphic that you'll see, 3 folks being tasked with writing on a chalkboard. Got a shorter person who can access the chalkboard, right? They can reach a bit of it. Taller person has much more range of access, really no noticeable problems there. And then the person that's sitting in the walker can't reach the chalkboard at all, right? So that's inequitable. that is a disabling experience for, some folks involved in that scenario. Then through the act of accommodation, right, which is adding in or taking away something to remove a barrier, more often adding in, you can see that the shorter person now has a block that they can stand on so they can reach the chalkboard. The taller person didn't need anything. They were good. They had full access anyway. So they stay the same. And then the person utilizing the walker or sitting on the walker got a ramp and a platform. So now they all have equitable access to that chalkboard. What we're aiming for is full accessibility, right? Where accommodations aren't even necessary because everything is built accessible for all or equitable for all right from the get-go. So in this example, a bigger chalkboard, put a little bit lower, now everybody can reach it, no accommodation necessary. This is what we're aiming for. I can say at Bridgewater State, we're not there yet. We're working on it. But it's our goal. It's what we have in mind as our endpoint. Next slide. So this comes into play also when we talk about the differences between IDA and 504 law versus ADA, right? So because the purpose of IDEA is to ensure success, we see a lot of modifications, right, to a student's experience. And that's what Sarah was referring to previously, as far as altering or lowering the expectations or standards, not having to do as much work. So one thing that I see a lot on copies of IEPs that come through my office are students who have the ability to, if a 10-page paper is assigned, they only have to write 2 pages, right? Or if there are tests, their tests need to be only true or false or multiple choice, right? They can take exams again and again and again until they get a passing grade. Those are modifications. That's changing the learning experience to meet the needs of the student, right? That's not going to happen in a college or university setting, right? We want you to get the full academic experience and leave with the knowledge and, development that we provide, right? So we're doing those accommodations for access again. So if you think of that visual, right, which we'll go back to again in 1 second, instead of giving the box, to the shorter person or providing that ramp and platform to the person that's sitting on the walker, a modification would be, you don't have to write on the board, right? That's an example of the difference, right? So through those accommodations for access, the expectations or the standards of that task are the same between folks with disabilities, folks without disabilities, right? And it's all about removing those barriers, whether that's for the learning experience or some other aspect of the university experience. And a really key concept here is that it cannot fundamentally alter the nature of a core component of a program or create an undue burden for the university. So that's another reason why those modifications are not likely to occur. So Adam, if you can advance one more time. This is that graphic just one more time. So again, the addition of resources in that middle slide would be the accommodations, as opposed to, let's say, in that equality slide, telling the student in this case that's sitting on that walker that they just don't have to do the assignment or they can do something different. Okay. Next slide. Sarah, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. So yes, so Jenna was talking about how students must self-identify. They must do it. They must step up. They are now in the driver's seat. They have the wheel. They're the ones in charge of their life at the university or at the college. And what we have found lately is that a lot of parents are writing to us and sending us things and doing things for the student. And we strongly encourage you to right now stop doing as much as you can. Maybe have a chat on Sundays to see what the student has done in terms of stepping up and advocating for themselves and asking for things that they need. But students have to be the ones who submit the documentation to the designated office. Students, that's a student's responsibility. In some cases, if you submit an IEP or other documentation to the admissions office, it might not be forwarded. Some people send it to health services. It does not come to us. Health services especially will never send anything to us because they have HIPAA rules. So the next step, and Kaitlin, do you want to talk about the interactive process a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so the next step would be to let the Disability Services Office, or whatever the name of the office is where you are attending, let them know that you're on campus, that you have a disability, and sort of start that process. I know for us, the first step is usually a meeting. I will meet with the incoming student. We talk a little bit about what their diagnoses are, how it affects them academically, maybe some accommodations they've had before. We talk about reasonable accommodations at the college level. Those might be different, as Jenna was saying, those might be different than what they had on their IEP or 504 in high school. So that's an important conversation. And then, we review the documentation. So another important point is some students feel that an IEP just follows them to college and it's just implemented at the college level. But there's more documentation that we need, rather than just the IEP or the 504, like their most recent testing. Depending on the disability, it could be documentation from a medical provider, from a therapist, a psychiatrist. So that's also what we talk about in the interactive process. We talk about what we would need for documentation. And then it's the student's responsibility to get that documentation and send it to us. And then once they have accommodations ready to go, it depends on the school. At Westfield State, we send out accommodation notifications to professors on behalf of the student. We send them out at the start of every semester. Other schools will give the student a copy of their accommodation letter, and then it's the student's responsibility to deliver it to their professors to make sure the professor gets that information. And then the student.
One thing?
Yep.
One thing that's important though is that the student and the faculty both know what is in that letter of accommodation. So whether when we send out an email, it goes to the student and the faculty member at the same time, and students receive a copy of the letter of accommodation and give it to the professor, they would also keep a copy of that letter, because it is important that the student is on top of what the accommodations are that have been granted.
Yeah, and then the student in our office will just stay in, continuous communication. It's the student's responsibility to let us know if something's not going the way it should, if they need assistance with something, if there's an accommodation that just isn't working, or if, they're having another issue and they want to talk about an additional accommodation. They should reach out to us and let us know, because otherwise we don't know. And so it should be an interactive process, throughout their entire time at the institution, and that way, we can help when there's an issue that we can do something about.
One thing that's nice about the college level is that you don't have to wait 3 months for an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting. For the most part, and at least in our offices, you can just walk in, and if Kaitlin or our grad assistant is free, you can start the process of adding an accommodation, increasing the time for an accommodation, or saying, I really don't need this accommodation. So you can do that at any point in time. And as long as all the documentation is there, your professors can be noted probably within 24 hours, depending on the situation. So it's a much easier process. It's not laden down with 5 or 6 or 7 other people in the room.
Yeah, we like to refer to it as a living document, which is a little cheesy, but it really is. It can change at any point as long as there's discussion and rationale behind it, right?
Right.
Adam, would you mind advancing the slide? Because I think we have 2 different slide decks going. So now we're going to talk about academic expectations of college. That's another fun one. So this is another big area of difference. And I just saw a question pop up in the chat. So before we hop into this, why don't we answer that question? So the question is about some confusion about whether or not to change the IEP to a 504. And I know Sarah and I both have really strong feelings about this. the high school, a couple of different educational advocates, and a specific organization advised the person who sent this message to change to a 504. The college that the person's child is going to and the child's therapist say that they don't need to change to a 4. So who do we believe? Sarah?
Colleges.
Yeah, you
So-
really don't. Yeah,
You don't have to.
Yeah.
No.
I think, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the benefit potentially of being on an IEP is that they're supposed to work with students through the transition to either college or work. Therefore, you can have a plan made up. How is it going to be supported? Is my daughter learning academic strategies? Is she learning how to organize and prepare for classes? Is she being prepared to be a college student? Because so many students are not right now. So it's a discussion that you have with the educational advocates, the high school. I will speak with them. You can have them call me up. I am like that. And I will talk with them about why it's not necessary to move to a 504. Some people say it's to prepare a student to go to college. The 504 does not, in and of itself, does not prepare a student to go to college. It just says, these are the accommodations and that's it. What
I think sometimes, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what prepares a student to go to college is somebody who is working with them and naming the strategies and skills they need and helping them practice the strategies and skills they need to be in college.
Yeah, I think sometimes the root of that is like a nice but wrong attempt to achieve what Sarah was just describing. So because 504s in general don't modify curriculums, right? They're not like customized to meet that like success quotient. I think that's where the idea of like, oh, this will get them more prepared for what the college experience is like. I think that's where that comes from. I think the other aspect is there is a misconception that I know we've been fighting for years, right? That like, if you have a 504 in high school and you take it with you to college and you show up on the first day with your 504 from high school, it still applies. It does not. The laws, right? The 504 law, right, is still applicable, but it's actually a different section of 504 if you really want to get down to it, right? But I always compare it to like a cell phone contract, right? You can't go into T-Mobile with your Verizon contract and be like, but you're still a cell phone. I expect you to honor this. Like, same idea, right? It's cell service, but very different sets, right? And one can't dictate what the other one does necessarily, right? There are some other great questions in the Q&A, and we will be getting to those as we continue our chat here. So going back to these academic expectations of college, there are a lot of differences between college and high school here. Volume of coursework is a really, really huge one, right? You are doing a lot of independent learning in the college environment. So you may have assigned readings or videos to watch or excerpts to listen to that may never be talked about in class, but they're going to be on your exam, right? Or you're going to be expected to demonstrate that you understand those concepts in some way without it being like clearly given to you or reviewed with you, right? A lot of times there are higher standards for getting a grade, right? And evidencing that you know and understand and can apply the material. And depending on what the course is and what program you're in and what school you're in, you may have to get at least a C as a grade to move forward in consecutive classes, right?
We've seen B in some disciplines also. So a B minus, a B, a C plus, and a C. Those are the usuals.
Yep. There's a lot more pressure, I would say, on how you evidence your learning, right? So tests are still very common in a lot of classroom settings, but they may not be a weekly test, right? They may just be a midterm and a final, which means you've got a lot more information to show in a much smaller period of time. And you've got to retain that information for a longer period of time to be able to evidence it during those like more spaced out exams, right? you know, my kiddo is in school, there's a portal that we can log into, we can see grades, we can see feedback, we can see progress reports. Some schools have that, a lot of schools don't. Even if a school does have that in like college and university setting, it may not be used in that same way. So you may not get a ton of or quick feedback on how you as a student are doing in your classes, right? And grades are not necessarily straightforward. It's not, you know, I have 10 assignments, so each one of them is worth 10% of my final grade. Different assignments can be weighted differently. Does participation count towards your grade? Does it not count? Do you get 100 just for attending? Do you, right? And that's going to vary class by class, faculty by faculty, across the board. Makeup work, which is heavily relied upon by a lot of students working with my office, it's not a thing in college for the most part. I don't know too many faculty who allow makeup work or like extra credit assignments. And then the other really big thing is the amount of study, right, that is required for your classes. So the general recommendation is that you study 2 to 3, or you plan to study 2 to 3 hours outside of class for each credit hour. And before we look at the next slide, I just want to clarify that study is not like reviewing your notes over and over again, right? Study could be reading your book, watching those videos, taking your notes, reviewing your notes, right? All of those are categorized as study. And as I say those things, I think about my students who have a really hard time reading, right? So instead of 2 to 3 hours for each credit hour, they might be more in that like 3 to 4 to 5 hour range, because reading is something that is directly impacted by their diagnosis, and they're just going to need more time to do that. So Adam, if we can move to the next slide.
I'm going to add a little bit. When you were talking about grades, the expectations that the student calculates those grades. So many professors will say, I told you how to calculate your grades. There's a rubric. It says that this is 20% of the grade, this is 25% of the grade. Do the math. So that's an expectation. It's not just told on like, what is it, school something. I don't know what platform you have where you can see all your students' grades. That is not to be expected at a college. Some colleges do have that, mostly private colleges, but it's just know that they need to figure out the grades themselves normally.
Definitely, thanks. So this is just a breakdown of academic time management, and it looks really overwhelming. And I do that kind of intentionally to like really bring home how important it is. But also I like to make sure that you don't like freak out and say, oh my gosh, there's no way my student could do this. Because remember, chances are your student is currently going to school for what, 6 hours a day, roughly. So keep that in mind, right? The general rule that we were talking about before is for every, I always mess up how I say it, for every credit hour of a course, you want to plan to study 2 to 3 hours outside of that class, right? Most courses in college are 3 credits, right? So that's 3 hours of class time. For, let's say, easy math, we'll use a 2-hour studying for 1 hour of credit ratio. So 3 hours of a credit course, so 1 class, you are now talking about 6 hours of studying outside of class. So you add that together, that now becomes 9 hours, right? So 3 hours in class, 6 hours of studying makes 9 hours. An average full-time course load at my university tends to be about 4 classes, which is 12 credits. So that's 36 hours a week for school. That's a full-time job right there, right? And 12 credits a semester is not going to get you out in 4 years. Now, I really like to focus on the fact that nobody, not nobody, but barely anyone finishes a degree now in 4 years. But if you want to, you need to be taking probably 5 classes or 15 credits a semester, so you get your full 120 in that 4-year period. That becomes 45 hours a week for school. Then you want to think about what else is the student going to be doing, right? Are they going to be in clubs, activities? Are they going to have to work? Are they doing work study as part of their financial aid package? Those are all things that need to start getting added in there. When students are in K through 12, their days are pretty much structured for them, right? They have to come up with their own structure to fill those 36, 45, whatever academic hours, plus their extracurriculars. So this is a really huge opportunity to start skill building as early as possible to prepare your student for college. Next slide. So this is another big kind of different expectation area, which is executive function. This is something that we see at Bridgewater, and I believe, pretty much all the other universities that we generally interact with across the state, that students struggle as far as that communication and executive function area goes. So time management, having appropriate communications with professors versus students. So one of those first things is students need to be able to communicate with faculty and staff in a respectful, professional manner, understanding that they're not likely to receive an immediate response and should utilize office hours. That is a foreign concept to a lot of folks, but it is even harder when you initially transition from high school to college. Students have to seek assistance as needed. And Kaitlin highlighted this when she was talking about that student-led experience. If something is not working, you've got to identify as the student that it's not working. And then you, as the student, have to identify either the appropriate resource or the next closest appropriate resource to be able to get some help addressing that. And then you have to follow through on whatever that next step is and the next step after that, right? Students are building their schedules. They have to be able to understand and track their graduation requirements. They do get assistance, right? There's academic advisors, but it's really important that the student be able to stay on top of that with a high level of independence as well. The student needs to be able to look at their syllabus for each class and understand what work is due when, how to submit it, what it entails, how it will be graded. And some schools, Bridgewater, Westfield, have academic coaching or other supportive resources to help students in that executive function area. But again, not every school does, and you still got to build those skills, right? And then students need to, as we said before, balance academics with social interests, wellness, rest, sports, clubs, activities, employment, whatever else is of interest to them. Next slide. And you got to click this one. Sorry, it's got the fade in. So there's a lot. Keep clicking. There's a couple more, I think. So this is where parents normally go, oh my gosh, this is a lot. This is very much, and there's no way my student could possibly do this. They can, right? It's going to be hard. They're going to need your help probably. But you can start doing things now, right? So helping your student become a good self-advocate is really critical for this process, right? And that is the student's ability to communicate their needs effectively to others. You can start now with your student, helping them understand who they are, understanding what they need, and understanding how to get what they need.
Jenna.
Yeah.
There's a question that says, when is a good point to start preparing for college? My student is just entering high school this fall. My answer is now.
No. Yeah, do it.
Do what Jenna is about to tell you.
Am I about to tell something?
Yeah, work with the student to help build the self-advocacy skills. It should come naturally after a while.
Yeah, I actually had an amazing meeting with a student yesterday who was able to talk so clearly about how she experienced her diagnosis that at the end of our discussion, I was like, wow, you nailed that. Because it's not often I get a whole range of students. I have students like that. And then I have students who come in and I, initiate a discussion about what their diagnosis is, right? Because that tends to be a pretty safe starting point. And we have plenty of students who don't know what their diagnosis is. Their answer is, I have an IEP, right? Is that bad? No, but it could be better, right? by giving them the information and the language and the skills that they need to talk about their diagnosis, how they experience it, what helps, what doesn't help, they're going to be that much more likely to get what they need to have that equitable experience in the college and workforce after, right, arena. Next slide,
I had
please.
a student last week, 2 weeks ago, who said, I asked him a question about something related to what's going on. And he said, can I call my mom? And I said, no, you may not. I knew him well enough that I could say this to him. I said, write down your question. You can ask her later. By the end of our conversation, his question was answered. So I think that's the other thing when students are in college, all the disability service providers, access service providers that I know are going to ask those probing questions of your son and daughter. Because part of this is, how comfortable do you feel letting your adult child sit in a room with a stranger and talk about what they need? Many parents do not, and they say, can I be part of the conversation? And I say, not right now. You can come in later and see if there are any blanks that need to be filled, but right now, this is your adult child's time to take that steering wheel.
Adam, let's see what the next slide is. There we go, FERPA. So I think I'd moved this to an earlier one. So my bad, everyone. But FERPA is the other kind of legal driving force as far as why the student is leading the experience, right? So FERPA is something that already exists. If your student's in K through 12, it's already a thing, right? It's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. But right now, you as a parent or guardian hold those rights to that student's educational records. The second they become 18 or they go to college, the student holds those rights, right? And the student can choose to authorize a release of that information to you or somebody else, right? But what it does is it allows the university to, at their discretion, share information as needed, right? And again, that student-led communication and that control over their experience is to help them become effective citizens, right? So how every school kind of handles FERPA, there are some similarities and then there are some big differences, right? So I would say every school is going to have a FERPA authorization form that can be filled out by the student authorizing the sharing of these records, right? For specific reasons or specific purposes, you know, for that info sharing. At my school, in my department, Student Accessibility Services, we believe very firmly in a nothing about us without us philosophy. There are very, very few, if any, cases where we will have a conversation, even with a FERPA authorization on file with a parent, family member, guardian, whatever, without that student being involved in that communication. We really want to make sure that they are championing their experience, right? Other schools handle it differently, though. Let's see, next slide. Got to click through this one too. Silly transitions. So going back to that who, what, and how, right? You as a parent or guardian, you are going to work with them on their strengths and weaknesses so that they can put those FERPA rights to good use, right? You're going to help them learn about their diagnosis, not only what it is, but like some aspects of it, right? And help them assist developing an understanding of how their diagnosis impacts them and what kind of language to use to get that clearly communicated, right? A really kind of low lift thing that I think folks can do is make sure that your student is coming to and participating in, if not leading, their IEP meetings, right? Help them feel empowered to identify the tools and resources that they find most helpful and be able to identify those, find those, ask for those in other settings, right? And helping your student develop skills in identifying challenges or anticipating challenges, right? And then the how of the who, what, how model is model and practice appropriate communication, right? start educating your student about their rights pursuant to ADA law, right? Discuss those upcoming differences between the high school and college environments, and know and reinforce this resources at your student's college. So once your student finds a college that they're going to be going to, we've said a couple of times now that, you know, if they're struggling in an area, they need to recognize that they're struggling and they need to know who to go to get help. If you know those resources, if you know that there's an academic achievement center or Banacos, which sounds like tacos at Westfield State University, right? You can say like, oh yeah, that's awful. Did you check in with those guys? You know, and that's still letting them take lead, but reminding them of those resources. See, next slide. So some of those resources at Bridgewater State are written out here. The resources that you find at different institutions will vary greatly, and we will, you know, kind of expand on this a little bit more. But you may find a college or university that is pretty straightforward. We do what's required by ADA 504. That's about it. They just do accommodations, right? Then there are ones that do a little bit more than that, and maybe they have some, you know, additional programs and events. Then there are ones where there are private pay opportunities that have like a lot of services or supports outside of the scope of reasonable accommodations. And then there are whole institutions, right, that are made specifically for students with disabilities. So we'll get into those, but this gives you a little glimpse of what Student Accessibility Services does at Bridgewater State University. And we do have an academic achievement center that does have executive function coaches and tutoring and a writing studio, right? And those aren't just for students with disabilities, they're open to everybody. So that's definitely something to look into when you are moving forward with that college search process. Next slide. All right, Sarah, take it away.
I'm giving this one to Kaitlin.
Nope.
I'll do the next one.
Okay. So there are a wide array of accommodations at the college level. They benefit students with all types of disabilities: learning, physical, psychological, medical. But the important word for accommodations at the college level is reasonable. So we want to make sure that they're reasonable for the student at this level. And our Disability Services Office and a lot of other schools do this too. They help provide support for negotiating with professors where appropriate. So if the professor or the student are unclear about an accommodation or how it's utilized, or sort of, you know, what are the limitations around it, we can help facilitate those conversations, and we can be part of that as well. We also provide referrals to other supports on campus. So these other supports, like Jenna mentioned, will differ depending on the school. So, you know, we'll talk a little bit later, we'll list out some other supports on campus, but whether it's a TRIO program or a reading and writing center or tutoring or, you know, whatever that school might be able to offer, we can help students we can help connect them with those other offices on campus and help them get that support. We've said this a few times now, but students are expected to register on their own with the Disability Services Office or the Accessibility Services Office and request their own accommodations. So you have to let us know that you're here. And then to get that process started, you know, you have to make contact with that office. They, like we talked about, must provide current documentation. So again, that documentation will look different depending on the disability. If it's something like a medical or a mental health condition, current usually means something that's provided within the last 6 months to a year, usually, hopefully closer to 6 months. And schools may have different forms or different requirements for that. So at Westfield, we have a form that we have providers fill out. Bridgewater probably has their own form. So that's why you want to connect with Disability Services to see, okay, what do I need my provider to fill out and how do I get that to you? So again, it's just really important to make that connection. If there's a school that you're interested in, reach out to their office and just see what services they offer. And then you can, you can start that connection right away.
Next slide.
So here is the list that I was just talking about, the other supports on campus. Again, these will differ from school to school, but it could be tutoring, writing, it could be a reading and writing center and assistance with that. Research librarians are always very helpful and a lot of times underutilized, I find, by students because they don't know that they're there, but they're super helpful. And so learning assistance, academic strategies. At Westfield, we have an academic strategies program that we offer to students throughout the whole year, to all students, whether they have a disability or not. Math centers, math tutoring centers, trio support services, honors programs. And then, professors and instructors, they have their office hours. They're also a wealth of information. They can help with lots of things. Advising office, counseling services. A lot of campuses have a counseling center right on the campus. So it's good to know about that resource. And then res life engagement staff, if you're living on campus, who's your RA, who's your RD, who do you go to when you need assistance with something? And then various student activities. So, and this list will change, it'll be different from school to school. So really do the research on the schools that you're interested in and see what they have to offer. And if something's more important to you than something else, make sure that the school that you're going to, make sure they have that for you.
On that note, when you are looking into those and other aspects that are available at the universities, the website is a really great place to start for many universities. But I would really encourage you to not see the website as a be all end all, right? So I can say in the case of Bridgewater, hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying this. Luckily, it's not recorded or being shared, right? Our website, yeah, I know. Oh no. Our website is like an external facing thing that is created really outside of my office, right? So we have a page on our website about these services, but if you really want to know who Student Accessibility Services is and what the experience is for students that use our office, follow us on social media, right? Come to some of the events that we have that are open to the public. Come to our admitted students days, right? Let your student really feel it out. Talk to us, right? Go deeper than the website, I would say, because there's a lot more to it.
So I was just answering a question about somebody being in a single. Speaking of resources, housing is a great resource. And just to say it out loud, whether a student should be in a single is never based on the diagnoses alone. So someone was talking about a student who is on the autism spectrum, has OCD and anxiety. We have students with those diagnoses in doubles or apartments and shared spaces. And we have students who cannot be in a shared space like that, or maybe they can only be in a single within an apartment. So it really depends on the student. What I would suggest now for anybody, especially if the accommodation is going to be one that you don't find in high school, like housing, make sure that the student is seeing the appropriate practitioner sooner rather than later. So at least a year before going to college so they can get the appropriate documentation. So you can make sure that's actually what is necessary. So yes, okay. I just wanted to share that. What is the Banacos Academic Center? Okay, we have changed since this slide. Actually, our tutoring program is now in the care center, but we do have academic strategies for all students on campus. And we actually do it. It's not just on campus. So our students who are commuter students, our students who only do the online programs. We do our academic strategies by Zoom so people can come in and from their rooms, they can come in. You're going to delete that right now. Who come in for just because they're a commuter, they come in wherever they want. We talk about things like how to take effective notes, creating useful notes, creating your own study guide. I love that one because you are not guaranteed a study guide when you get to college. So one of the things that students can work on now to help prepare is figuring out how to write their own study guide. And then bringing it to your teacher and saying, is this covering everything I need to know? But writing these things out and also making sure that you're practicing them is important. Reading for remembering and understanding. What else do we do? We're doing how to communicate with your professor now. So we're doing things like that just because we know that students are not coming and never did come with all 10 skills, say there were 10 skills we needed. Not everybody came with the same 10 skills. Right now, we're seeing a lot of students who don't have, who don't understand things like they have to go to class, they have to hand in their assignments on time. Some people are just showing up at class and not doing any work. And then we have students who are not showing up to class at all, but doing all the work and not realizing that they could fail the class because they never showed up. So there are a lot of different things now that we need to work with students on to make sure that they get their act together, basically. So they know the expectations of college. And so we're working hard at trying to figure that out. It's been a few years since COVID. People talk about students not getting the developmental, not growing at the developmental rate they should be growing at. So it's challenging. Okay, so the Banacos Academic Center at Westfield State University also holds disability services and the learning disabilities program. We have every year about 1,000 to 1,100 students who self-identify as having a disability, and that is anywhere from a third to a fourth of our population, depending on our enrollment at the time. So we're a big population. Another person also asked, well, what are the faculty like? They're different at different schools. I know that our faculty are probably 98% fabulous. And then because we're part of the world, about 2% of them are not so fabulous and we need to school them. But we get into those conversations with professors. That's why it's so important that the students tell us what's going on. So if your adult child ever calls you up and says, they didn't give me an accommodation, the first question you should say is, did you go talk to Jenna? Did you go talk to Kaitlin? Did you go talk to Sarah? And if they didn't, then walk them over on the phone and don't hang up the phone until they're there so that they get there, because the students are so reluctant to complain. I don't want to throw the professor under the bus. Or, which is, the biggest fear is, if I tell on the professor, then they're going to give me a bad grade. People in our positions are there to help students work through that as well. Okay, so Banacos Academic Center, we're all about trying to help the student. We want to help the student succeed by giving them access. That's what we want to do. What's the next slide? Oh, okay. Learning disabilities program at Westfield State is really cool because, as some people were talking about, is there support? Are there programs? Are there executive functioning tutors? Things like that. The Learning Disabilities program is a program for incoming first-year students who have a learning disorder and ADHD. Okay. It is a free service. It is different than other services like Landmark College, which is fabulous. I love it. Dean College, Curry College, they all cost and they provide a much more intrusive support. So what we do is we follow a student from orientation to graduation. We meet with students once or twice a week. We talk about studying, organizing, finding resources. We work with them in their first and second year on early course registration, which does fabulous things like make sure that they get through the core requirements faster than most students. It can help provide opportunities for students to do study abroad, to do internships, to go work at Disney, to go work in DC, in one of the agencies. So it really helps make sure that students have opportunity, but it also helps to make sure that they are balancing their schedule out. So balancing out with, let's say, if someone has a reading disorder, it's really difficult for them to read. Let's balance it out, make sure they don't have 4 heavy reading courses. So and then we know, for the most part, the professors and instructors, we know how they test or how they assess. So we can create a much more effective starting board for the student. We work with students to determine which accommodations are reasonable and appropriate. So the student and I will sit down and talk about that. They do not have to go to Kaitlin. Kaitlin has enough on her plate because she has all the other students. So yes, it's a one-stop shop when it comes to working with accommodations and academic support. And then we reach out regularly to monitor academic progress. And the best way to do this is for the students to sit down and talk with us and tell us what's going on and share with us their story. Our priority deadline is February 1st. We are still taking applications if people are interested in that for this fall. I think that's it for Learning Disabilities Program. Anything else? Yes, so a bunch of different support programs out there, and I'm learning of more. So I think it's important to just go online and look. So I just put in the chat that there's a bunch of people are doing executive functioning support for a cost. Some have scholarships also, or like a prorated rate. So you can make sure you look online and see what people are doing. A lot of them are doing it virtually as well. collegeautismspectrum.com is good for a list of programs that work with students who are on the autism spectrum. You can look at Excel at Bridgewater State. Landmark College is for students who have a learning disorder, ADHD, or they're on the autism spectrum. I have big respect for this place, and I often tell students or parents you might want to start there. So someone was talking about a student who is now 26, is about to go back to college. If you can find the funds and support to go to Landmark College and do the summer program or do a semester there to start, they're going to teach you how to study. That is what they do. They're going to talk to you about executive functioning. They're going to talk to you about how to learn. They're going to work with you and how you learn in particular. It's great, great space. Curry College has their PAL program. Dean College, I can't remember the name of the program, but they have one. Does anybody remember the name? No? No, okay, look it up. And Lesley University, Mitchell University. Boston University has a great, huge supports for students with mental health conditions. And they also have academic coaching that is sometimes free, I think. So we
Arch Learning. Thank you, Kelly.
Say it again.
It's Arch Learning Community at Dean.
Arch Learning Community at where? At Dean?
At Dean, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so for mental health, BU, they have mentor programs. They have academic coaching support, and it's available anywhere. So we had someone from Westfield doing it virtually with Boston University. Yeah, so check it out. Ask. I have this theory, audacity to ask. Ask your questions, tell your stories, and somebody is going to have a response for you that's going to be helpful. Are there any more questions in the chat?
There are, yeah. We have some slides coming up about the process of applying and admissions considerations and waivers. Do we want to answer the chat things first and then just bounce back to the slides?
Sure.
All right, so one of the questions that I'm seeing is, what documents do most colleges want from high school guidance? So we don't want anything from high school guidance. We want it from your student. So
ambiance, good old ambiance.
I know. So one of the things about determining eligibility and what specifically will the student be eligible for, it's kind of a three-pronged process, right? So part of it is getting information from documentation, part of it is getting information from the student self-report, and then part of it is our own professional observations and interactions with the student, right? For that documentation, everybody's documentation requirements are going to be a little bit different, right? We generally would like documentation that is dated within the last 3 years, though there's flexibility with that. We generally want documentation that clearly states the diagnosis, the duration that it's expected to last, and the impact, right? Particularly for those major, functional life areas. And then there might be some additional stuff, right? So if a student has a particular like learning disability, let's say, we may want to take a look at scores on standardized tests. So if you are a parent or guardian or a guidance counselor that is currently looking at that 3-year testing coming up, make sure that your student leaves high school with adult normed testing. So the really popular one that I'll refer to is the WISC versus the WAIS. The WAIS is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, which you need to be 16, right, Sarah? 16, I think, to have it's normed for adults. Get that, right? Because adult normed assessments are critical. My university in particular, we do a lot of accommodations for MTELs, right? Because we have a lot of teachers coming out of here. If you need accommodations for the MTELs, you don't have to meet my expectations. You have to meet MTEL's expectations for documentation. Those are very specific. If you can get that documentation through the high school process, so it's done, right? And not
free.
out of your pocket. Yeah, that's the way to do it. So if you were to go on Bridgewater's website and click on academics and then student accessibility, you would see, if you scroll down, our documentation requirements. But in general, I would say those are the things that we're looking for at its core. Yeah.
So the Learning Disabilities Program, this is not disability services, it's a learning disabilities program. We are looking for the WAIS, very specifically for the cognitive testing, which would be the WAIS. There are some other ones, achievement testing, such as Woodcock-Johnson, and there are some other ones, and the full testing, not just one part of it. And we're looking for a student to send us a college essay, which if you're on the Common App, most students do that. So the college essay and 2 subject matter references from subject matter teachers. So not necessarily from the PE teacher or the special education support person, but from teachers, someone teaching English, someone teaching math. That's what we're looking for. And I'm just going to say, because it's about colleges, that when you're in Massachusetts, you have to meet the standards applicable to all applicants. Some people call me up and say, but you're the learning disabilities program. Why can't my son apply if he is GPA of 1.9? And I say, because that doesn't meet the Massachusetts standards. People must be qualified and meet the requirements to enter a university in Massachusetts. And those requirements are available at www.mass.edu. You need to check the college's admission requirements because they might be different. If it's a private college, it's going to be different. They're not going to have the same Common Core requirements that we require. And also check which applications you use. Some schools are not on the Common App and some are. Okay.
On a related note to the kind of diagnostic documentation that's getting turned in, somebody asked if a neuropsych eval report, is that enough, right? And we also hear a lot of times, is a copy of my IEP enough? Maybe is my answer, maybe. It depends on how thorough it's written, right? I would say most neuropsych evals that I read really hit on all those marks that I've asked for, but I've also seen some doozies that definitely do not, right? An IEP, maybe, but you want to really make sure that the content of those documents has all of those criteria that are defined by the school.
Can we go to the next slide? I think it says the answer to the next question.
Yep. Next slide, please. Thank you.
It does. Okay. Yeah, Kelly, I'll get your answer in a second. So in general, admissions, decisions should never, ever, ever consider disability. Okay. So if they're asking you, or if maybe they know you, and I remember someone asking me, how can the student go to college if he can't read? And I'm thinking, it doesn't matter if he can look at the book and get those words into his head. It matters whether he can get those words into his head and think about it. So the admissions counselor should not be considering disability. All right, they just should not. There is an exception to it. I'll tell you in a second. Oh, and then we address that line. So the exception is if someone's requesting an SAT or foreign language waiver. In Massachusetts, universities, a student who has been granted a waiver, foreign language waiver, in high school, that should be honored for being admitted into the college. Okay, it stops there, but it should be honored for being admitted into the college in the Massachusetts university. If it's a private school, I don't think we have any purview over that. I'm not quite sure what she would say about that. But this means that you should make sure it says in the IEP or 504 that foreign language is waived. Make sure it is in writing, because if it is not in writing, then the college can make that choice whether or not they meet the foreign language waiver requirement, which is basically they need to have an evaluation completed within the past 3 years that indicates a specific diagnosis of a learning disability that affects the ability to learn a foreign language. Okay. All right. SAT waiver, so many people don't require it anymore, but it's important to know that the student must have a documented learning disability. ADHD is not a learning disability. ASD is not a learning disability. There must be a diagnosed learning disability. A lot of students are coming out of high school with a communication, the qualification for their IEP is that they have a communication disorder, communication disability. That might not be considered a learning disability. So if someone has a speech impediment, that's not necessarily a learning disability. So it's very important that you get these things clearly written out. And we often ask for a note from the special education person or the school psychologist to say, well, is this a disability or not? So, or what kind of disability is this? I think that covers that.
Yes, I think so. So there are other questions in the chat. This is the end of our slides, really. I know, Adam, you have like a contact slide if you want to show that. I do want to make sure we get to the other questions in the chat because it's super important information. One of the questions is, what standard accommodations are required for colleges to follow under the ADA? Funny story, there's no standard accommodation.
Yeah.
The way that it's written is we really need to use that interactive process to determine the most reasonable accommodation. And what's most reasonable depends hugely on the person, the course, the institution, the experience, what their barrier is. There are certainly accommodations that are more commonly found across different college and university settings. So I always give the example of time and a half on exams. I feel like I just like hand that out like stadium style with one of those like t-shirt launchers, right? That's a pretty common one. Are we required to do that in all cases? No. But when it's appropriate, sure, we'll absolutely grant that, right? And there are certain areas that we are required to make sure a student has equal access in. The big one I always think of is communication, right? So if we have a student who is deaf, it may be that we provide them with an ASL interpreter, if that's what's helpful for them. It may be that we provide them with live transcription of their courses, if that's what's helpful for them, right? So there's no prescriptive, you must require this. It's that we want to require what best provides an accessible or equitable experience in specific areas, right? There is a question in here about students getting full rides or scholarships that cover most, if not all, of college. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice as somebody who is paying off loans forever? Are there such scholarships available for students with disabilities? And if so, how do you apply for them? So
Adam, no?
oh yeah, anything, yeah, Adam's all over it. So I would say your best bet is to broadly search the World Wide Web for specific disability-based scholarship opportunities, right? And then within individual schools, you may also find scholarships. At Bridgewater State, my office oversees the administration of the Erica K. Pennell Memorial Scholarship, which is funded by the Bridge program of Bridgewater. It is a smaller dollar amount. It is not going to cover your entire tuition, but you get that, you get a couple others, there you go. Also, for everyone, disabilities or not, there are often opportunities to lower the cost of tuition. So, you know, we're not talking grad school right now, but when you come to grad school, if that's part of your student's future, there are graduate assistantships, there are sometimes paid internships, there are opportunities to be a resident assistant or a resident advisor where you get free housing. So those are questions that you can really explore individually at each college that you're looking at before you make that final consideration.
And I did get, get tagged, so I will jump in. Yeah, MEFA exists to help people pay for college. So we actually have some fantastic resources. If people go to MEFA.org, we have some wonderful resources on finding scholarships. We have some webinars about finding scholarships specific to you. There's lots of great information on there. I'm not going to try and direct people all over our website. There's actually a wonderful college cost calculator that we put out there so that people can figure out how that's going to all work for you. Wonderful, wonderful things that have been put together by people who are much smarter than me over on that website. So, I encourage people to go take a look, particularly as they're planning for that experience.
Yeah, MEFA has some really amazing resources, even outside of the financial aspects, just for helping figure out, is college right for me and what makes college right for me, right? So the last really big question that's in the chat relates to MACI programs for students with disabilities. And also, I would say Governor Baker's movement law guidance from a bit ago. I don't even remember how long ago it is because time is totally non-existent for me, where the doors are really much more open for people with disabilities to be able to experience aspects of college, right? So at this moment, and someone please, Sarah, hop in if I say something wrong, but at this moment, as Sarah was describing, there are certain criteria that have to be met for entering into a fully matriculated, right? So degree seeking program at a Massachusetts school, right? That would require at this point in time, a high school diploma and some other stuff, right? However, there are MACI programs and other programs that are customized for students that either do not yet have a high school diploma or will not have a high school diploma. Those are new at many schools. Some schools have had them developed for a while. Some have had them and are kind of modifying them. So definitely look into options. I can take a moment to tell you about Bridgewater's because honestly, I feel like we're really nailing it. It's not my department. It is a totally different area of Bridgewater State University, but there's overlap, but I just want you to know it doesn't fall under me. So the program at Bridgewater is called Excel, EXCEL. And there are 3 different options for the Excel program at this time. So one of them is the partnership program, and that's for students that are currently in high school and they are dually enrolled in college. It is supported through the school system. They have a learning coach from their school district, and there are certain school districts that partner with the Bridgewater State Excel program. There's opportunities to live on campus as part of it, which is really cool. Lots of fun stuff there. Then you get to the point where your student has finished high school, right? So if they finish high school by aging out, right? So they have more of a certificate of completion, not a diploma. If they want to come to Bridgewater in a college-like fashion, they can privately pay, right, for what is known as the Excel, I'm going to mess it up, partnership certificate program. So the certificate program is a structured set of courses and activities with a whole boatload of additional supplemental supports because you're paying for them, right? The student goes through that program, and at the conclusion of it, they get a certificate of completion of this program, which they can put on their resume. They can use all of the great stuff that Bridgewater has to offer: career services, internship services, the gyms, you name it. They can be in clubs and activities. They work with my office if they need academic accommodations, the gamut, right? So that's a private pay program that is run through there. And then the final version would be if your student is graduating high school with a diploma, right? So they are eligible, you know, to apply for being fully matriculated, but they're not quite ready for it, right? It's a little too much independence. They need a bit more one-on-one assistance. They need some more, you know, enhanced supports outside of the scope of what's offered traditionally. Then they might want to be in what is known as the Excel transition program. And so the purpose of that, again, private pay. So that's another big asterisk for some folks. You would be taking classes either for credit or auditing them, right? So that it's a little lower risk for folks. Having that full-fledged college experience with a lot more support. And the intent is to become fully matriculated once you kind of feel more ready for it, right? So those are some Macy options that exist. But again, those are unique to Bridgewater, and how other schools operate their Macy programs or transitional programs can be very different.
We have what is called the ICE program, and it's more like the first program Jenna talked about, where there's a partnership with the local school districts, and students will come take classes, and for the most part, they're auditing. We do have, I think we've had 2 students matriculate into the university. One of them's in the Learning Disabilities program, actually, and he's doing great, and he's going to graduate either, I think, next year. But so yes, so it can be a door of opportunity for some students. But I mean, statistically, it's not a lot of students. So I think when you're educating parents about this, it's make sure that they understand the different opportunities and levels of opportunities available, and what is more likely to work for the student. Lastly, the question about financial questions and accommodation questions. When you look at college, do you make a separate appointment with each department? You can start with the admissions officer. I know that my admissions officers know a lot about everything, and I'm very proud of them. So you can start with them. And then when their knowledge bank has, they've reached their level of knowledge bank, then you go make an appointment with the other people.
I answered back in the Q&A for that one. And I said definitely 2 separate. So same thing, like our admissions officers have some knowledge, but you want to get the best info from the best source. So accommodations, go to the disability place, right? Financial aid, that is definitely not me. I don't know that I should be telling anyone about financial aid.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So you really want to go straight to the source to get the most quality and accurate information as well.
Yeah.
I know that we are running just a few minutes over time, so I wanted to just acknowledge that. I also want to, I realized that we said Macy, we said ICE, we never said that stands for Inclusive Concurrent Enrollment, in case anybody wants to look into that program and didn't know that that's an option that exists. And I also, just because financial things were brought up, I just want to quickly mention once again, please, check out MEFA for assistance in that way. And because we started out with it, attainable accounts as an investment account. Somebody said, when should I start planning? The earlier you set up those accounts, the more the investments have the opportunity to grow. I want to give everybody the greatest possibility for success. So it would behooves me to at least put it out there that that's a good thing to start early, even if you're just doing a little bit at a time. This has been an extraordinary panel. I thank all of these amazing experts. I think that we will definitely have to do more of these because there's been so much wonderful interaction. So I just keep your ear out, folk. We will make sure that we do this again. Because I know that we're running over time and people probably have places to go and things to do, especially these wonderful people who are presenting with me because they are extremely busy, and I appreciate them so much for giving their time and expertise. But yeah, is there any last things that we want to say before we close out today's session?
Just ask your questions. Ask them, tell your story.
All right, well, I think there's one more thing popped up, which is a big thank you.
You're
Wonderful.
welcome.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you everyone for coming and
Thank
listening, and thank you everybody for your wonderful expertise again.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Be well, everybody.